The day a store manager had me escorted out in front of a packed showroom. She figured she'd embarrassed another customer who'd never come back. What she didn't know was that she had just declared war on someone who had every legal reason to walk right back through those doors. Looking back now, I still don't think the worst part was being kicked out. It was realizing how quickly one stranger could decide exactly who I was before I'd spoken more than 3 words. My name is Ethan Walker. I spent almost 20 years in the Army before moving into a leadership position training new officers outside Colorado Springs. Military life teaches you to stay calm under pressure, to control your temper, and to let your actions speak louder than your emotions. Most days that's easy enough. That Friday afternoon, though, it became the hardest thing I'd done in years. I'd been putting away money for months to replace my old laptop. The thing sounded like it was trying to take off every time I opened a spreadsheet, and my daughter Emily kept joking that my computer belonged in a museum. She was starting college that fall, and we had this little tradition where we'd video chat every Sunday evening no matter where either of us happened to be. I wanted something reliable before she left home. Nothing fancy, just dependable. After leaving base, I drove straight to a local electronics retailer called Summit Digital. It wasn't some huge national chain, but around town people spoke highly of it. I grabbed a coffee on the way, parked my pickup, adjusted my uniform after a long day, and walked inside carrying an envelope with the cash I'd saved. I know some people think carrying that much cash is strange, but after dealing with identity theft a few years earlier, I'd gotten into the habit of paying for larger purchases that way whenever I could. The showroom smelled like fresh plastic and new electronics. Giant televisions covered one wall. Kids were trying out gaming systems while parents argued over phone plans. And for a second it just felt like another ordinary afternoon. A young salesman smiled and started walking toward me. But before he even reached me, another woman intercepted him with a quick wave of her hand. She was dressed in a sharp navy blazer with a silver name tag that read Melissa Grant, store manager. She looked at me the same way people inspect a stain on a carpet they haven't decided how to clean yet. Her eyes traveled from my boots to my shoulders, paused on my uniform, then landed on the worn backpack I'd carried for years. "Can I help you?" she asked, except it wasn't really a question. "Yeah," I smiled. "I'm looking for the new Horizon Pro laptop." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she folded her arms. "I think you'd be more comfortable leaving." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. "Sorry, you heard me. We reserve the right to refuse service." I blinked. Did I do something wrong? "You're making my employees uncomfortable." I looked around. Nobody seemed uncomfortable except maybe the young salesman who suddenly became very interested in organizing phone chargers. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "I literally walked in less than a minute ago. Please leave before this becomes a problem." I reached into my wallet and showed her my military identification, mostly because I figured she'd realize she'd made some kind of mistake. Instead, her expression somehow got colder. "That doesn't change anything." So I pulled the envelope from my backpack, opened it just enough for her to see the stack of bills. "I'm here to buy a computer. That's all." She barely glanced at it. "Security." I heard the word before I even realized she'd spoken into the radio clipped to her shoulder. 2 employees and the store's security officer walked over. None of them looked happy about it. One older gentleman quietly said, "Sir, if you could just come with us." I looked at him and could tell he hated every second of what was happening. Around us, conversation stopped. People stared. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve and whispered something while pointing at me. A woman standing near the printers frowned at Melissa and asked, "Is there really a reason for this?" Melissa answered loud enough for everyone to hear. "We take customer safety very seriously." Customer safety. Those 2 words echoed in my head because somehow I'd gone from shopping for a laptop to being treated like a threat. Every instinct I'd developed in uniform told me not to argue. Raising my voice would have only confirmed whatever story she'd already invented about me. So I nodded once, zipped my backpack, and walked toward the exit. As the automatic doors slid open, I heard someone behind me mutter, "That's messed up." Another customer shook his head. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. Most people simply looked uncomfortable, the way decent folks do when they witness something they know isn't right, but aren't sure how to stop. I climbed into my truck, closed the door, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. My heart wasn't racing from anger anymore. It was disappointment. After everything I'd seen in my career, after every deployment, every training exercise, every sacrifice my family had quietly accepted over the years. I never imagined buying a laptop would end with me being escorted into a parking lot like a criminal. I should have driven away right then. Honestly, that's probably what most people would have done. I almost turned the key and left. But something deep inside kept telling me this story wasn't over. Not even close. I had barely backed out of the parking space when my phone buzzed. It was my older brother Ryan asking if I was still making it home that weekend. I stared at the screen for a second before answering, forcing a smile into my voice that he couldn't possibly see. Yeah, I should be there tonight. I wanted to believe it when I said it. Instead, I drove across the street, parked beneath a row of cottonwood trees, and sat there replaying every second of what had just happened. I kept asking myself the same question. What exactly had she seen when she looked at me? A tired officer after a long week? A customer carrying cash? Or had she simply decided my story before I ever had the chance to tell it? About 3 hours later, I was halfway home when another surprise landed. My phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. The caller introduced himself as Officer Daniel Pierce with the County Police Department. He politely asked if I'd be available that evening because they needed to speak with me regarding an incident at Summit Digital. I actually thought maybe Melissa had come to her senses and wanted to apologize. Instead, 2 patrol cars pulled into my apartment complex just after 7 that evening. My neighbors peeked through curtains while the officers knocked on my door. They were professional, respectful, and honestly looked a little confused themselves. One of them explained that the store manager had filed a report claiming I became verbally aggressive, threatened employees, and refused multiple lawful requests to leave before security intervened. I almost laughed because it sounded like we were talking about 2 completely different people. Still, procedures are procedures. They asked questions, took notes, verified where I'd been afterward, and reviewed the timeline with me. 3 hours disappeared before they finally stood up to leave. One officer paused at the doorway and quietly admitted, "Something about this report doesn't add up, Mr. Walker, but we'll sort that out." By the time they left, my flight was long gone. $400 down the drain, and more importantly, the weekend I'd promised my family was over before it even began. The next Monday wasn't any easier. Because a police report had been filed involving an Army major, my command was obligated to conduct an administrative review. Nobody accused me of wrongdoing, but that's not really how rumors work. People don't remember investigations ending quietly. They remember hearing there was an investigation at all. Walking across base that week felt different. A few people asked if everything was okay. Others avoided asking altogether. My commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, called me into his office. He'd known me for years and didn't look worried so much as disappointed that I was even sitting there. "Ethan," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I don't believe everything I read, but I need to hear your version." I told him exactly what happened, every detail from walking into the store to sitting in my apartment answering police questions. When I finished, he was silent for several seconds before saying, "You've spent 2 decades building your reputation. Don't let someone else's bad decision convince you to throw that away by reacting emotionally." Those words stayed with me, because if I'm honest, that's exactly where my mind was headed. I wasn't angry enough to yell. I was angry enough to want justice. A few days later, after cooling off, I decided to go back to Summit Digital one last time. Not to argue, not to threaten anyone. I simply wanted to file a formal complaint with whoever supervised Melissa. Every company has someone above the store manager. At least, that's what I believed. The second I stepped through the front doors, I saw her behind the customer service counter. She recognized me immediately. There wasn't even a hint of surprise on her face. Instead, she smiled. One of those tight little smiles that isn't happiness at all, just satisfaction. "Well," she said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, "look who decided to come back." I walked to the counter and calmly replied, "I'd like the contact information for your regional manager." She didn't reach for a business card. She leaned forward. "I already told you we don't want you here. I'm asking for a complaint form." She laughed under her breath. "People like you always think somebody higher up is going to save them." I stared at her. "People like me?" She shrugged. "Former military, current military, doesn't matter. You walk in expecting special treatment because of a uniform." The words hit harder than I'd expected. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every man and woman I'd ever served beside. "I never asked for special treatment," I answered quietly. "I asked to buy a laptop. Then buy it somewhere else." The young salesman I'd seen days earlier was standing a few feet away. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Our eyes met for a second, and I could almost read the apology he wasn't allowed to say out loud. Melissa pointed toward the exit again. "Leave before I have the police remove you a second time." This time, I didn't argue. I didn't even respond. I simply nodded once, turned around, and walked back outside. She probably mistook my silence for defeat. It wasn't. Sitting inside my truck, I opened the center console and pulled out a weathered leather portfolio I'd carried for years. Most people would have expected insurance papers or vehicle registration. Instead, inside were corporate documents I'd almost forgotten existed. 3 years earlier, Summit Digital had been weeks away from bankruptcy. I knew that because an old friend from business school had been one of the financial consultants trying to keep the company alive. At the time, I'd recently inherited money after my grandfather passed away. He'd owned a small manufacturing company and believed that investing in struggling American businesses was sometimes worth more than chasing quick profits. Through a private investment company set up under the name Aspen Ridge Holdings, I'd purchased a substantial ownership stake. I never wanted publicity. I never wanted employees treating me differently. So my name never appeared anywhere customers or store managers would ever see. I signed papers, attended exactly one shareholder meeting over video conference, then went back to my regular life. The investment was something I rarely even thought about. Until that afternoon, I flipped through stock certificates, shareholder agreements, voting provisions, and corporate bylaws. 36% ownership. Large enough that certain executive decisions required shareholder review whenever company liability became significant. Melissa had absolutely no idea. As far as she knew, I was just another customer she decided wasn't worth respecting. I picked up my phone and called the only attorney whose number I'd kept all these years. Olivia Bennett answered on the second ring. "Ethan, this is a surprise. I think we need to schedule an emergency board meeting." She laughed softly. "That's a sentence I haven't heard from you in a long time." "I'm serious." There was a pause. "What happened?" I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. By the end of the story, I heard papers shuffling on her desk. "Don't contact the company again," she finally said. "Don't post online. Don't answer reporters if this somehow gets out. Let me handle it." "Is there enough here?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly. "But if even half of what you described is supported by evidence, this isn't going to stay inside one store for very long." 48 hours later, legal notices arrived at Summit Digital headquarters requesting preservation of every security recording, employee statement, internal email, and incident report connected to the event. What Melissa still didn't know was that the investigation she'd mocked was no longer about an unhappy customer. It had become a formal corporate inquiry initiated by one of the largest shareholders in the entire company. And once those lawyers started opening doors, they were about to find far more than any of us expected. The investigation moved a lot slower than television makes you believe. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches, no surprise witnesses bursting through doors at the last second. Instead, there were weeks of interviews, document reviews, security footage analyzed from every possible angle, and attorneys asking the same questions in 5 different ways until the truth was impossible to hide. Olivia called me every few days with small updates. "We're making progress," she'd say. "Just stay patient." Patience has never been easy when your reputation is hanging in the balance. But after 2 decades in the Army, I'd learned that rushing usually creates bigger problems than waiting. About 3 weeks into the investigation, she finally called with something different in her voice. "Ethan," she said, "you need to see this." I met her at the firm's conference room that afternoon. She pressed play on a security recording from the day everything started. Watching yourself from another angle is a strange experience. There I was, walking through the front doors carrying my old backpack, smiling at the first employee who greeted me. The recording had no audio, but it didn't need any. It clearly showed that I never raised my hands, never stepped toward anyone aggressively, never blocked an aisle or argued with security. Then another recording from a different camera showed Melissa pointing toward the exit before I had even finished our first conversation. Olivia paused the video. "Now compare that to her written statement." She slid a copy of the incident report across the table. For separate claims contradicted the footage. According to the report, I'd shouted at employees. The cameras showed me speaking calmly. She claimed I refused to leave. The video showed me walking out voluntarily. She wrote that security had to physically guide me outside. They never laid a hand on me. She also claimed customers appeared frightened. The footage actually showed several customers looking confused and one woman speaking directly to Melissa while shaking her head. "This isn't just inaccurate," Olivia said quietly. "Some of these statements appear knowingly false." The deeper the attorneys dug, the worse things became for the company. Employees were interviewed individually instead of together. Without Melissa standing over them, their stories started changing. The young salesman I'd noticed that first day admitted he'd tried to approach me before being ordered not to. The older security officer explained he'd never believed I posed any threat, but followed instructions because Melissa was the store manager. Then came the email records. Investigators discovered Melissa had instructed supervisors to prepare statements supporting her version before anyone had even reviewed the security footage. That decision alone sent shockwaves through the board. By the 47th day, legal expenses had climbed into six figures, not because the facts were complicated, but because cleaning up one person's decisions had become incredibly expensive. The board meeting itself lasted nearly 4 hours. I attended remotely, listening more than speaking. Melissa appeared confident at first, insisting she had acted to protect employees and customers. But confidence fades quickly when evidence keeps replacing opinion. One board member asked why her written report differed from the surveillance recordings. Another questioned why she had bypassed company procedures before contacting law enforcement. Then the chairman asked the question that changed everything. "Can you provide any objective reason Mr. Walker was considered a threat before you approached him?" For the first time, she had no immediate answer. The silence seemed to stretch forever. Finally, she tried to explain that she trusted her instincts. The chairman simply nodded once and replied, "Businesses are not protected by instincts. They're protected by facts." The vote wasn't close. Melissa's employment was terminated for cause that afternoon. The company issued a formal written apology acknowledging that I had been treated unfairly and confirming the internal investigation found no evidence supporting the accusations made against me. Separate legal proceedings followed regarding the false statements submitted to law enforcement. I won't pretend those months were enjoyable. Even when justice eventually arrives, it doesn't erase sleepless nights or restore time lost with family. But accountability matters because without it, the next person might experience the same thing. A few months later, the board invited me to become an active member rather than remaining a silent investor. I accepted, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to help build a company where decisions like this would never happen again. One Saturday morning, nearly a year after everything started, I drove back to the same Summit digital store. The atmosphere felt completely different. New leadership, new employees. A young manager walked over with a smile and asked if I needed any help. "Actually," I said, looking toward the laptop display I'd never reached the first time, "I've been meaning to buy one for quite a while." We chatted for a few minutes about processors, battery life, and college video calls. It was the most ordinary shopping experience imaginable, which somehow made it feel extraordinary. When I reached the register, the manager thanked me for my service after noticing my military ID during the purchase. There was no spotlight, no applause, no dramatic reveal that I happened to own part of the company. I didn't tell him. I didn't need to. Respect means the most when it's offered freely, not because someone thinks you're important. As I carried that laptop out to my truck, I realized the biggest victory had never been winning an investigation or sitting on the board. It was proving to myself that staying calm had accomplished more than losing my temper ever could have. Looking back now, I still wonder what would have happened if Melissa had simply smiled and asked, "How can I help you today?" Maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe she would have kept her career, the company would have avoided months of legal trouble, and I would have been home in time for dinner with my family. One decision changed every life connected to that afternoon. So now I'd like to ask you something. If you had been in my shoes, would you have walked away after being humiliated, or would you have fought back the way I did? And do you think justice was served, or did everything go too far? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always spark strong opinions, and I'd genuinely like to hear where you stand.